My life, until recently, had always flowed like a tranquil river, without ripples, with nothing remarkable enough to be told as a long story. I lived quietly, hidden, like a shadow. Even in the very apartment that Paul, my late husband, and I had bought decades ago, I gradually became a shadow, a piece of furniture occupying space that no one saw anymore. For the past 10 years, that apartment no longer truly belonged to me. It belonged to the bustling lives of my son, Darren, and his wife, Sophie. I moved into the smallest room, the one that used to be a storage closet. My books, Robert photos, the old armchair where he used to read the newspaper, all slowly migrated there, making way for the trendy, bright, and minimalist space that Sophie adored. I didn't argue. What was the point? The most important thing was my son's happiness. Every morning of mine began identically. I woke before everyone else, at 6, careful not to make a sound, not to interrupt their sleep. I tiptoed into the kitchen, started cooking porridge for Darren, and brewed 2 different types of tea. Strong black tea for him, and a special herbal tea with imported petals and herbs for Sophie, a concoction that always made my throat itch. I brewed simple black tea for myself and drank it alone in my room, just to avoid them. My pension was transferred directly into our joint account. "Mom, what do you need money for?" Darren would say, awkwardly avoiding my gaze. "We buy everything together," I agreed. Indeed, what did I need it for? My clothes were old. I rarely went out, only to the grocery store or the pharmacy. All my desires had long withered, shrinking to just one, to see my son happy. I remember giving away all my savings, the money I had set aside for cataract surgery, when Sophie suddenly needed a new designer handbag. "Mom, you understand, right?" she cooed, hugging my shoulders. "Darren's colleagues at the office are all high status. I have to match them. It's important for his career." Darren nodded, looking at me gratefully. I gave them the money, and after that, I just started buying stronger reading glasses. My opinions carried no weight in the house. If I said the soup was too salty, Sophie would pout and say, "Mom, you're old. Your taste buds aren't what they used to be." If I tried to give my son advice based on my life experience, he would gently interrupt. "Mom, everything's different now. We'll figure things out ourselves." They figured things out. As for me, I was a function, the cook, the cleaner, an interest-free ATM, an invisible woman whose presence was convenient but not necessary. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting in the armchair, I would look at Robert's photo and ask him, "Paul, did we raise him right, honey? He was a good boy, wasn't he?" It's just how life is now. My husband remained silent in the photo, and I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. After all, a mother should sacrifice herself for her children, shouldn't she? On my 60th birthday, I expected nothing. Perhaps a small bouquet of daisies, my favorite flowers, or a box of my preferred dark chocolate. That morning, Sophie was unexpectedly affectionate. She even hugged me and chirped, "Happy birthday, Mom. Darren and I have an amazing gift for you. You'll be speechless." I confess, I melted. A warm feeling, long forgotten since childhood, the excitement of anticipating a miracle, surged within me again. Darren was also unusually fidgety, constantly checking his watch. "Get ready, Mom," he said. "We're going to get your gift." I put on my best dress, the only one not yet threadbare, a simple gingham dress with tiny floral patterns. I looked at myself in the mirror, an elderly woman with tired eyes, but at that moment somehow they were happy. We got in the car. Sophie stayed home, citing a headache. "You two go ahead," she waved. "Tell me all about it later." We drove for a long time. City roads gradually turned into suburban highways, then came desolate fields and gloomy forests. At first, I tried to ask Darren where we were going, but he just replied curtly, without looking at me. "It's a surprise, Mom. You'll see." I fell silent, looking out the window. My anxiety grew. This road did not lead to a resort, a spa, or any place where one might celebrate a birthday. It was leading deep into the wilderness. Finally, we turned onto a rough dirt road. The car shook so violently that my teeth chattered. All around were abandoned fields overgrown with weeds and crooked utility poles. And then a village appeared ahead, or rather, what was left of it. A few houses sunk deep into the ground, blackened by time. Not a single house looked inhabited. Darren braked sharply next to the ugliest structure. It wasn't even a house, but more like a shack with a collapsing roof and boarded-up windows. Around it, weeds grew waist-high, and the fence was rotten. "We're here," he said curtly, turning off the engine. I was silent. I didn't understand. This simply couldn't be. Surely it was a mistake, a cruel joke. Darren got out of the car, opened the trunk, and pulled out my old canvas bag, the one I used for weekend trips 20 years ago. Inside were a change of clothes, a robe, and a bar of laundry soap. He placed the bag on the ground next to a thick bush. "Here, Mom," he gestured towards the dilapidated wreck. "This is your gift. Sophie and I bought you a house, a private place with fresh air. You'll live here. It'll be good for you." The words fell into the deafening silence like stones into a deep well. I looked at him, my son, and didn't recognize him. His face was alien, his eyes empty, lifeless. There was no malice in them, no compassion, nothing but weariness and irritation. "Darren," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What is this? Why?" "Mom, don't start," he frowned. "We decided this is for the best for everyone. You need a rest from the city hustle, and we need our own space. Sophie is pregnant." He blurted out the last words like an ace, an excuse for everything. He didn't even look at me. He was in a hurry. He turned back to the car and slammed the door shut. I stood on the road, watching him through the windshield. He started the engine, and at the exact moment the engine's roar tore through the deathly silence of the countryside, something happened inside me. It wasn't rage, pain, or despair. It was something else. It was as if deep in my chest, where for so many years there had only been warm, forgiving love, there was a clear, decisive click, like the turning of a metal key in a rusty lock. Click, and in place of the warmth was a coldness, absolute as crystal. The car rolled away, kicking up a cloud of dust. I didn't cry. I didn't scream his name. I just stood, watching the silver Yimport sedan shrink, turn into a tiny dot, and disappear around the bend. The dust slowly settled. The smell of gasoline dissipated. All that was left was me, my old bag, and a dead house on the edge of a dead town. And a deafening silence. And in that silence, for the first time in years, I heard myself. Not the mother, not the mother-in-law, not the housekeeper, but me, Anna. And this Evelyn said to me in a very calm, very clear voice, "That's enough. Enough." I understood that this was not the end. This was the beginning, and no one would ever be able to steal my life again. I would reclaim it myself. The dust kicked up by my son's car slowly settled on the roadside weeds. I stood motionless, listening to the engine fade into the distance. When that sound, too, dissolved, a silence fell. A silence I hadn't heard since childhood, when I visited my grandmother in the countryside. But that silence was dead, heavy. I slowly turned, looking at my gift, the dilapidated wooden house, blackened by time and weathering, with its windows boarded up. The porch sagged to one side. One of the steps had collapsed, revealing last year's damp, rotting leaves. Around the house was a tangled mess of weeds, wild blackberries intertwined with morning glory vines. A picture of absolute desolation, a place forgotten by everyone, a place where I was brought to be forgotten. Tears? No. Inside me was as dry as a desert. The icy click in my chest had frozen everything that could have burst forth in bitter sobs at this moment. Despair was still somewhere in the past, in the car that had carried my son away. Here, on this desolate patch of land, all that remained was me and a cold clarity, echoing in my head. I stepped onto the porch, automatically avoiding the rotten plank, and placed my bag on the intact edge. My gaze swept over this misery, but my mind had flown far away, to my bright, clean 3-bedroom apartment on Peachtree Street, the very apartment where Sophie was probably already calculating what color curtains to hang in my old room. Mine, that was the key word. The pathetic, abandoned look of this dilapidated house forced me to recall something I had tried not to think about all these years, just to avoid tempting fate. I remembered the words of my late husband, Paul. We were sitting in that very kitchen, 10 years before he passed away, and he, serious and uncharacteristically so, placed documents in front of me. "Evie," he said then, looking straight into my eyes, "tomorrow, I'm going to the lawyer, and am going to transfer my entire share to you so that you will be the sole owner." I waved my hand then, asking, "Why, Paul? We're a family. We have a son." But he shook his head. "A son is one thing, but life is long. Anything can happen. You are all I have, and I need to be sure that you always have a roof over your head, yours and no one else's." I didn't think much of it then, but I followed his wishes. And after his death, all the paperwork was filed under my name, Anna, the sole and legal owner. Darren didn't know about this. He was sure that the apartment was joint inheritance that would eventually naturally belong to him. I had never clarified that for him. Why should I? It seemed petty, lacking trust in my own son. How wrong I was. And then there was a second, even more important memory. About 5 years ago, I received notification of an inheritance. A distant cousin of mine from Birmingham, Alabama, whom I had only met once as a child, had passed away. Living alone and childless, she left me her modest one-bedroom apartment. I went there, handled all the paperwork, sold it quickly to the first buyers, and deposited the entire sum into a separate savings account at the bank. I didn't say a word to Darren or Sophie. At the time, they were taking out a large loan to buy a new car. I knew what would happen if they found out about my money. It wouldn't be stolen. No, it would simply evaporate into their pressing needs, into their status, into their future, just as my pension income, my old savings, and my health had evaporated. And I remained silent, not out of greed, but out of an instinct for self-preservation that I thought had long atrophied within me. This account was my untouchable reserve, my last line of defense that no one knew about. These thoughts flashed through my head, not as vague images, but as clear, sharp facts. It was as if someone had turned on a light in a dark closet, and I saw all the tools I had. I opened my bag. Darren must have packed it in a hurry. An old cotton bathrobe, slippers, a towel, and a bar of laundry soap. And at the bottom, amidst these simple items, lay my savior. An old flip phone that Sophie contemptuously called the old lady's phone. They had bought it for me a few years ago so I could stay in touch. The simplest one, no internet, no extra features. They had no idea that its memory held the phone numbers that were now the most important things in the world to me. I pressed the power button. The battery was almost full. I always kept it charged out of habit. But the screen showed no network signal. My heart, which until now had been beating steadily and coldly, skipped a beat for a second. Was it all for nothing? I looked around. The town lay in a valley. I needed to go higher. Without hesitation, I followed an overgrown path leading away from the house, uphill on a small mound. My feet snagged on thorns. Branches whipped my face, but I paid no attention. I walked, my eyes glued to the phone screen as if it were a compass. And finally, at the top of the hill, where a lone, gnarled cedar tree stood, 2 faint signal bars appeared. That was enough. I found Mr. Miller's number in the phone book. Bank, Mr. Harrison. He was the branch manager, the same age as my Paul. He knew me from when my husband and I opened our first savings account together. I pressed call. The phone rang long and slowly. Hello? A familiar, slightly weary voice answered. Mr. Harrison. Hello, this is Anna. My voice was steady, without a trace of tremor. I was surprised at myself. Evelyn, good afternoon. How can I help you? The surprise was evident in his voice. I hadn't called him personally in years. Mr. Harrison, I need you to do a few urgent things right now if possible. I'm listening. First, please immediately block all powers of attorney and access rights to my accounts held by my son, Thomas. All of them, without exception. A silence descended on the line. Are you sure, Evelyn? Absolutely certain, I cut in. Second, all my pension funds that go into the joint account card, I need you to immediately redirect them to my personal savings account, the one I opened 5 years ago. Do you remember? Yes, of course. I remember. It will be done. And third, completely block his access to view the balances of all my accounts. Complete financial isolation. From this minute on, all transactions on my accounts must have my personal confirmation. Personal. I understand, Evelyn. Everything will be done within 1 hour. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Goodbye. I hung up. The first part of the plan was executed. Now for the second part. I looked for another number. Marcus Jones, attorney. He had helped me with my cousin's inheritance paperwork. A young, smart, very thorough professional. He answered almost immediately. Marcus Jones, attorney at law. Marcus. Hello. This is Anna. We worked together on the Birmingham apartment. Mrs. Reed, of course, I remember you. Hello. Is something wrong? Something is wrong, I replied calmly. I need your help. It concerns my apartment on Peachtree Street. I need to formally confirm my sole ownership and prepare documents that will exclude any claims against it from third parties, including my son. The lawyer paused for a second, processing the information. I understand you want to completely secure your property. That's a wise move. Please email me copies of your ID and property deeds and I'll get started. I'll prepare a formal cease and desist if required. I can't send anything right now. I'm out of town and I don't have the documents with me. They were all left at the apartment. But can you start by inquiring with the County Registry of Deeds? Get all the relevant records? Yes, absolutely. I can start immediately. You can count on me, Mrs. Reed. I count on you. Thank you. I put down the phone. The coldness in my chest hadn't disappeared, but now it felt different. It wasn't the cold of shock. It was the cold of steel, the cold of a tool ready for work. I walked back down the hill to the house, and now it looked different. It no longer seemed like a tomb to me. Instead, it was a temporary headquarters, a quiet, secluded place from which I would wage my bloodless war. And right at this moment, I knew that in my apartment, in my living room, my son and his wife were probably drinking champagne, celebrating how cleverly they had orchestrated everything. Finally, we got rid of the old woman, Sophie would say, taking a sip. Now we can start renovating and living like real people. They were celebrating their victory. They had no idea they had just lost a battle without even knowing it had begun. I pushed open the heavy wooden door, and it creaked as I stepped inside. The smell of damp, dust, and old decay assailed my nostrils. This wasn't just an old house, it was decades of neglect. The stove was rusty, the furniture covered in a thick layer of gray dust, the floorboards beneath my feet rotten. But strangely, I felt neither fear nor dismay. Instead, a practical curiosity arose, as if I were taking over from a very irresponsible previous owner. I found an old shovel and a blunt axe in the shed. They were rusty and worn, but still usable. It took a lot of effort to chop the dry branches and clear the waist-high weeds growing around the house. Every stroke of the hoe, every swing of the axe made my 3-year-old body groan. My back ached, my hands were calloused, and I was drenched in sweat. But strangely, that very physical pain was an antidote for my soul. My mind no longer had room for toxic thoughts about Darren and Sophie. My world narrowed, focusing only on the immediate tasks. A bucket of clean water drawn from the well, a simple meal from old canned goods I found in the cellar, a pile of dry firewood for the cold night. I lived like Robinson Crusoe, and this simple manual labor cleansed my mind. The icy coldness in my chest didn't melt, but transformed into a still, sharp energy. It was strength. Every evening, as the sun began to dip behind the distant trees, I would climb the small hill behind the house. My feet would catch on thorny bushes, branches would whip my face, but I didn't care. My eyes were glued to the screen of my old phone. 2 faint but persistent signal bars appeared. It wasn't just a signal. It was the lifeline connecting me to the outside world, to the plan I was nurturing. It was a reminder that I still had a voice, power, a battle not yet over. In the darkness that enveloped the desolate town, I felt a chilling clarity. This was not the end. This was the beginning. Days passed, blurring into a long and meaningful sequence of efforts. I no longer counted whether it was the 4th or 5th day. What difference did it make? In this silence, time wasn't measured by numbers on a calendar, but by tasks completed. Floors swept, water buckets filled, the first fire lit in the stove, which filled the house with a warm, forgotten, familiar smell of smoke. The rage within me, that cold fury born on the dusty road, had settled. It hadn't disappeared. No, it merely sank deep to the bottom of my soul like a thick, heavy layer of frost, becoming my foundation. I no longer thought about them, Darren and Sophie. I thought about myself. That turned out to be a very unfamiliar and strange occupation. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as I sat on the porch, savoring the last sips of herbal tea brewed from currant leaves I found in the garden, the phone rang, shrill and unpleasant, shattering the evening's tranquility. The screen showed Darren's name. I let it ring a few more times before picking up. Everything inside me was calm. "Yes," I said. "Mom," you finally answered. "Where are you? I've been trying to call you for an hour." His voice carried that familiar, condescending irritation. "I'm not walking, Darren. I'm breathing air. There's plenty of it here," I replied evenly. "All right. How are you settling in?" he asked in the tone of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary formality. "Bit by bit, I'm getting by, thanks for asking." He completely missed my quiet sarcasm. "Listen, Mom, there's a thing. Sophie's card isn't working at the store. Your auxiliary card. There must be money in it. I checked this morning. Did you accidentally press something wrong? Or is it a bank error? Could you call them about it, huh?" So this was the first robin, the first small ripple in the stagnant water of their complacency. I remained silent, letting him continue. "You need to call and say everything is fine. Sophie is very upset. She wants to buy a dress." I pictured the scene, my daughter-in-law in a fancy store, handing over my debit card, the one that faithfully received my pension, and then seeing "declined" on the card machine. Her surprise, then her indignation. How dare they? The old woman's account is faulty. "Mom, are you listening?" Darren urged. "I'm listening," I said softly, and then I heard him, clearly covering the phone with his hand, but not very well, saying to someone nearby, "I don't know. She's quiet, just sitting there." In reply, I heard Sophie's voice, clear as breaking glass. I would recognize it anywhere. Contemptuous, shrill. "Why are you still talking to her? She's putting on a show. Decided to play tough in her old age, has she? Hurt her feelings? She'll rot in that corner penniless, then she'll come crawling back to apologize to us. Tell her not to be stupid. Tell her to fix things. I need that dress." Then Darren's voice came back, softer, conciliatory. "Tiff, wait." And her voice again, louder. "What?" "Wait. The kitchen estimator is coming tomorrow and we haven't paid the property tax. I got a text about that debt today. Did she turn that off too from her old lady phone? I tell you, the dementia is starting. We shouldn't have bought her a house. We should have found her a nursing home. Dementia, putting on a show, sitting penniless." The words didn't hurt me. They were a final, definitive diagnosis. They confirmed everything I had understood that day. Darren abandoned me on that road. To them, I was not a person, a mother. I was an object, a function, an inconvenient, aging piece of furniture that had suddenly started to malfunction. And they weren't trying to fix it. They were just angry that it had stopped working properly. All the tiniest, furthest hidden sparks of hope in the deepest corner of my soul, that perhaps I had been too harsh, that I had overreacted, all vanished in that moment. The ice in my chest grew harder than granite. A rustle returned to the phone and Darren's voice grew louder, directed at me. "Mom, are you there? So, will you call the bank?" I inhaled. The air was cool and fresh. "No, Darren," I said very softly but clearly. "What? No, you can't or you won't." Disbelief was clear in his voice. "Take care of yourselves," I said, and pressed the end call button. I put the phone down and looked for a long time at the darkening yard. I was no longer angry. I only felt a cold, righteous calm. They had judged themselves. They had called everything by its right name. They thought this was my pathetic little rebellion, my performance. They couldn't imagine that this wasn't a performance. This was the final curtain call, and it was playing out for them right now. I decided to explore the attic on the second day. I climbed the rickety makeshift ladder, expecting to find only discarded junk and cobwebs. That was indeed the case. But in the furthest corner, under a pile of old sacks, I found a small, unlocked wooden chest. I brushed off the dust. Dust swirled in the sunbeam, piercing a hole in the roof, and I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, neatly arranged on faded fabric, were bundles of letters tied with string and a thick, velvet-bound album. I brought it downstairs, sat on the porch, and opened it. Faces of long-dead people looked up at me. Stern men in uniforms, women in simple headscarves, chubby-faced children, weddings, send-offs, simple photos in fields. A whole life lived in this house emerged from the faded pictures. I didn't know these people, but for some reason I felt a strange connection to them. They too had lived, worked, loved, and raised children on this land. I turned each page and thought about my own album. The album I had left behind in the city, the thick blue one with photos of Paul and me, our wedding, Darren's birth, his first day of school, college. Here we are together by the sea, Darren still a little boy building sandcastles. And here are Paul and I alone in the park a year before he passed. My apartment wasn't just walls and square footage. It was an album, an archive of my life. Every cup, every book on the shelf, every scratch on the floor, it was a line in my story. The thought that strangers to my soul now reigned there stung sharper than any reproach. I realized I wasn't fighting for property. I was fighting for my past, for the right to my own memories. With those thoughts, as usual, I climbed my communication hill in the evening. I decided to call my lawyer, Marcus Jones, to see if there was any news. I had no illusions. I knew such cases weren't resolved quickly, but I needed to hear that the process was moving. He answered immediately, as if waiting for my call, but his voice was no longer cheerful. It was tense. "Mrs. Reed, good evening. I'm glad you called. I was about to reach you." "Is something wrong, Marcus?" I asked, and my heart, which had been beating steadily and coldly, gave a nervous jolt. "You could say we have some complications." He chose his words carefully. "I have made the preliminary inquiries as we agreed. Your apartment ownership on Peachtree Street is undisputed. You are the sole owner. Everything is clean." "Then what's the problem?" I asked impatiently. He paused. "Mrs. Reed, there is an encumbrance on your apartment." The word was strange to me. What does that mean? "It means there are certain restrictions on your property. It cannot be sold, gifted, or transacted in any way until this encumbrance is removed." "What encumbrance? Where did it come from?" The coldness began to return, but now it was different. Anxious, spiky. And then the lawyer said a sentence that split my world into before and after. He said it quietly, almost casually, but to me, it was an explosion. "Mrs. Reed, your apartment is held as collateral by a commercial bank. A mortgage agreement for a very substantial sum has been taken out on it." I was silent. I couldn't breathe. The air got stuck somewhere in my throat. Mortgage? How? When? That was the only word I could utter. "The agreement was signed 8 months ago," Marcus replied. 8 months. An image flashed into my mind immediately. Last winter, I was gravely ill. Pneumonia. I lay with a high fever for 2 weeks, mostly delirious. Darren went to work and Sophie took care of me. She was very attentive, brought me soup, changed compresses, ran to the pharmacy, and constantly fussed with some papers. "Mom, these documents are from the tax office. You have to sign before the deadline. Don't get up, I'll bring them to you. Mom, this is just a form for the homeowners association. It's just a formality. You just need to initial here." I remember her sliding sheets of paper under my pen. I could barely see what was written. The letters blurred before my eyes from weakness and fever. I trusted her. She was my son's wife, my family. I signed without looking, just so she would leave me in peace, just so I could sink into blissful oblivion. "Marcus." My voice trembled, but I quickly regained my composure. "Is my signature on it?" "Yes, Mrs. Reed. According to the documents, you personally acted as the borrower. The signature was notarized, but I have requested copies. There is reason to believe that I didn't need him to finish." I understood everything. This was not just forgery. It was worse. It was betrayal at my moment of utter helplessness. They hadn't just deceived me. They had exploited my illness, my weakness, my trust. They watched me struggle for breath, and at the same time calmly slid a financial noose under my pen. "How much is the sum?" I asked. My voice now sounded like metal scraping glass. The lawyer read the figure. It was horrendous, equivalent to the value of the apartment itself. A sum I would never see in 3 lifetimes. Something shattered within me. The thin thread that still held me to my old faith in people, in family, in my son. It didn't just break. It decayed, crumbled into dust. I suddenly saw everything in its true light. Their plan wasn't just to drive me out of the apartment. No, it was far more insidious. They had taken a colossal sum, using my life, my only property, as collateral. They had spent it or intended to spend it on their beautiful life, on a new kitchen, on a dress, on anything. And then when the bill came due, they would let the bank take the apartment. And me. They had already evacuated me, hidden me in this wilderness so I couldn't interfere, couldn't get in the way, couldn't discover anything until it was too late. This dilapidated house wasn't just a gift. It was my grave. The place where I was supposed to quietly disappear while they finalized eating the last scraps of my life. All the bitterness, all the maternal pain, all the doubt, all of it vanished. It was swept away by a cold, righteous wave of fury. This was no longer just anger. This was the feeling one gets when they see absolute, unvarnished evil and understand that they must stop it, not for revenge, but for justice. For the memory of my husband, who wanted to protect me, and for myself. "Marcus," I said into the phone, my voice hard as steel. "I understand. Do everything necessary. Pull all documents. Prepare the lawsuits. We will fight. I've already started, Mrs. Reed. I'm on your side." "I know," I replied and hung up. I slowly walked down the hill. The sun had set, but I felt as if I could see everything around me with incredible, almost inhuman clarity. Every blade of grass, every stone on the path. The world hadn't changed. I had changed. Before, I just wanted justice. Now, I knew I had to go all the way. They had awakened something in me that I didn't know I possessed, and they would soon regret it. The news of the mortgage didn't break me. It forged me, as if I had been plunged into cold water and then pushed into fire, and I didn't shatter but turned into steel. All these days I thought I was fighting for the past, for memories, for fairness. Now I understood I was fighting for the future, for the right to live. I sat on the hilltop, the cold wind rustling through my hair. I looked down at my desolate town, the dark silhouettes of the houses, and felt not a shred of malice. I felt the restoration of natural order. Justice isn't revenge. It's simply putting things back where they belong. And then my phone rang again, Darren's number. I had just hung up with Marcus, and now picked up my son's call. "Mama, what have you done?" It wasn't Darren's voice. The soft, slightly condescending tone he had used with me for years was gone. This was a high-pitched, broken shriek, full of visceral terror. I remained silent. "Are you crazy? We just got a stack of papers from the lawyer. The bank has blocked all the cards. Everything. We don't even have money for food. Are you trying to destroy us?" He gasped in anger and panic. In the background, I heard Sophie's sobbing. Not quiet, bitter tears, but dramatic, hysterical wails. "Do you understand what you're doing?" he screamed. "Sophie is sick. She can't handle stress. And you're trying to ruin our lives because of your old age dementia." "I haven't done anything, Darren," I replied softly and calmly. The contrast between his screaming and my whisper seemed to stun him. He went silent. "You yourselves did all this. You and your wife." "What? What did we do? We gave you a gift, bought you a house, and you repay us like this?" "You tried to steal my apartment, Darren. You mortgaged it when I was on my deathbed. You threw me out here so I wouldn't find out until the bank took my home. That's what you did." A deadly silence fell over the other end of the line, deadly as the silence in this town. I could only hear his heavy, gasping breaths. He hadn't expected this. He thought I knew nothing. He thought it was just hurt feelings, just a performance. But it turned out to be a verdict. "Mama," he finally croaked, and a pitiful, wheedling whine entered his voice. "Mom, this is all wrong. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding. We'll explain everything. How about you cancel everything, huh? Withdraw those papers. We'll come and talk." "Come here," I said. "Really?" Hope crept into his voice. "You'll cancel everything?" "No," I said. "I said come here. I'm waiting for you." I hung up. That was it. Now they knew. They knew this wasn't a tantrum or hurt feelings. This was war. And they knew that I knew their darkest secret. Now their panic would turn into despair, and despair drives people to the most insane actions. I walked down the hill. The night was pitch black, but I walked with complete confidence. I knew they would come, and I was ready. They arrived the next day, almost at noon. I heard them long before I saw them. The roar of a car engine ripped through the quiet of this sleepy town violently, inappropriately, then the screech of brakes right next to my house. A cloud of dust billowed up, clinging to the wild currant bushes by the roadside. I didn't move. I remained seated on the old porch where they had discarded me just days ago, calmly peeling tiny, quail egg-sized new potatoes I had found in the overgrown garden. That was my lunch. Car doors slammed almost simultaneously. Darren jumped out first, pale, haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. He wore an expensive shirt, but it was crumpled as if he had slept in it. Sophie stepped out slowly behind him. Her face was puffy, makeup smeared, but she still managed to hold her head high with that irritating disdain that had become her second nature. They stopped a few steps from the porch, glaring at me. I didn't lift my head, continuing to carefully peel the delicate skin of the potatoes. This simple, steady work helped me keep my mind clear, preventing emotions from overwhelming me. I was not a participant in this drama, but an observer. "Mama," Darren began, his voice hoarse, pleading. He took a step forward, extending his hands as if to embrace me. I didn't recoil. I just kept looking at my hands. "Mommy, what is this? Why are you doing this to us?" I dropped the peeled potato into the bowl of water and picked up the next one. "I was waiting for you," I replied without looking up. That simple statement seemed to disorient him. He expected shouts, accusations, or tears, anything but this cold, detached composure. We came to talk," he stammered. "Mama, this is just a terrible misunderstanding. We're family. Family helps each other, not soothes each other." He spoke, pre-prepared, proper, but empty words. There was not a shred of sincerity in them, only fear. The fear of losing everything he thought was self-evidently his. By then, Sophie's patience had run out. She stepped forward, pushing Darren aside. "Enough of this charade," she hissed, her face contorted with malice. "Have you completely lost your mind in your old age? Gone feral out here in the wilderness? By what right do you freeze our accounts? Who gave you that right?" She was almost screaming. Her voice, shrill and unpleasant, hurt my ears. "Do you realize what you've done?" she continued, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me. "You're shaming us. We had to cancel the kitchen order. Cancel! Everyone is laughing at us, and I'm not allowed to be stressed. The doctor forbade it. I'm carrying your grandchild, and you're driving us into poverty." She threw out her trump card. The pregnancy. Before, that single word would have made me forget myself and rush to fulfill their every whim. But not now. The iceberg in my chest didn't even stir. I slowly raised my eyes to look at her, a long, careful, unblinking stare, as one might look at a strange, unwelcome object. My gaze stopped her. She hesitated, silent, but then immediately composed herself, and her face flushed with renewed anger. Darren jumped in, trying once more to play the conciliator. "Mama, seriously, Sophie is right. She can't be stressed. Please, let's resolve this amicably. I know you're hurt. We understand. We were wrong. Maybe this house wasn't the best gift, but we'll fix everything. We'll take it all back. Just call your lawyer. Tell him you've changed your mind right now. Here, take my phone." He held out his gleaming smartphone to me, as if it were that simple. Just one phone call, and all their lies, all their betrayals would disappear, wiped away like writing on sand. I placed the knife and the last potato in the bowl, wiped my hands on my old apron, and slowly stood up. Now, I was eye to eye with them. They stood on the ground. I stood one step higher on my porch. "You want me to cancel everything?" I asked softly. Yes, Mommy," Darren nodded eagerly. Sophie looked at me defiantly, lips pressed tight. "So, I can give you my pension, my apartment, my life, all over again?" "Mama, don't exaggerate," Darren grimaced. "The apartment is ours together, and we will always take care of you." "Like you took care of me when I was sick?" I asked, and my voice grew even softer. But in the silence that followed, it sounded like thunder. They froze. I shifted my gaze to Sophie. She instinctively took a small step back. "I remember everything, Tiff," I said, calling her by her preferred name for the first time in years. "I remember you sitting by my bed. I remember your caring hands. And I remember the papers you brought me, saying they were from the tax office, from the condo association, just a mere formality." Sophie's face turned as white as paper. Her malice, her anger, her confidence, all drained from her like bad makeup in the rain. Only the raw fear of an animal remained. Darren looked from me to his wife, uncomprehending. "Mama, what are you talking about?" I looked at my son again. There was fear in his eyes, but also bewilderment. Perhaps he genuinely didn't know all the details. Perhaps she had even deceived him, or perhaps he simply preferred not to know. It no longer mattered. He was an accomplice. "I'm talking about the mortgage, Darren," I said, emphasizing each word. "The substantial mortgage you took out with the bank 8 months ago, using my apartment as collateral with my signature, a signature you obtained while I was delirious. Did you think I would never find out? Did you think I would quietly die here in this shack and the bank would simply take my home for your debts?" The final blow landed. It was evident in the way Darren reeled as if punched in the stomach. He looked at Sophie with horror and a new, bitter realization. She didn't look at him. She looked down at the ground, at her expensive shoes now stained with country mud. All their schemes, all their manipulations crumbled to dust. They stood before me naked in their greed and lies. The mask had been ripped off. The play was over. "So, Darren," I finished in my soft, even voice, "do you still want me to call the lawyer?" He couldn't utter a word. He just opened and closed his mouth like a beached fish. Sophie shrank into her shoulders, transforming from a predator into a cornered animal. A long and heavy pause. In that pause, the last drop of my maternal love for him died. It died and was buried right there, next to that rotting porch. "Go," I said. It wasn't a command or a request. It was a simple statement of fact, like, "It's raining," or "Night has fallen." They silently turned their backs, not looking at each other, like puppets with cut strings, and shuffled towards their expensive, gleaming car. The engine started, not with a roar, but somehow wearily. The car slowly, almost hesitantly, turned around and rolled away down the dusty road. I remained alone on the porch. Beside me was the bowl of peeled potatoes. My lunch, my new life, and the air around me was miraculously fresh. For the 2 initial days, I wrestled with the house and its overgrown garden. My life narrowed to simple manual tasks, finding firewood, stoking the stove, cleaning the only habitable room. In the evenings, I would climb the small hill to catch a phone signal, but I called no one. I waited. I knew they would call. And then, one morning as I struggled to pull a bucket of water from the old well behind the house, a deep, calm voice spoke from behind me. "Here, neighbor, let me give you a hand. Turning that wheel is no woman's job." I spun around in surprise. Standing before me was an elderly man, tall and slender, with a silver beard and strikingly clear blue eyes. With one hand, he effortlessly turned the weathered oak pulley wheel, hoisting the full bucket of water and setting it on the ground. "Samuel," he introduced himself, extending a large, calloused hand. "I live in that house over there, 2 plots away. I'm the last of the old guard in this town." "Anna," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm. That's how we met. Uncle Kurt, as he told me to call him, turned out to be a former county commissioner, an old-fashioned man, quiet but very wise and perceptive. He didn't pry into my past, nor did he ask why an elderly woman like me was here alone. He simply observed. He had seen the expensive car that brought me and then quickly departed. He had seen me struggling alone to turn this dilapidated house into a home, and he understood everything without needing a single explanation. He began to help me quietly. Some days, he'd bring over a few split logs of dry firewood. Other days, he'd share some milk from his goat. Occasionally, he'd just drop by in the evening, sit on the porch, and we'd chat idly about the weather, about the prospects of a good harvest. His calm presence was an immense spiritual support for me. Beside Uncle Kurt, I no longer felt alone. I felt safe. After all the betrayals, the lies, his presence was a rare ray of light, warming the coldness that had frozen in my chest. He was the first person to give me back a sense of trust, a strange yet wonderfully warm feeling. They arrived one morning, almost at noon. I had heard them long before I saw them. Not one, but several engines roaring, violently and incongruously tearing through the stillness of this sleepy town. Then brakes screeched right next to my house. A large cloud of dust billowed up, clinging to the wild berry bushes along the road. I didn't move. I remained seated on the dilapidated porch where they had abandoned me just days before, using an old knife to peel the tiny quail egg-sized new potatoes I'd found in the overgrown garden. That was my lunch. Car doors slammed almost simultaneously. Darren jumped out first, pale, haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. He wore an expensive shirt, but it was crumpled as if he had slept in it. Sophie stepped out more slowly, following him. Her face was puffy, makeup smeared, but she still managed to hold her head high with that irritating contempt and arrogance that had become her second nature. They stood a few steps from the porch, staring at me. I didn't lift my head, continuing to carefully peel the delicate skin of the potato. This simple, repetitive task helped me keep my mind steady, preventing emotions from overwhelming me. I was not a participant in this drama, but an observer. "Mom," Darren began, his voice hoarse, pleading. He took a step forward, extending his hands as if to embrace me. I didn't recoil. I just kept looking at my hands. "Mom, what is this? Why are you doing this to us?" I dropped the peeled potato into the bowl of water and picked up the next one. "I was waiting for you," I replied without looking up. That simple statement seemed to disorient him. He expected shouts, accusations, tears, anything but this cold, detached composure. We came to talk," he stammered. "Mom, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We're family. Family helps each other, not sues each other." He spoke, rehearsed, proper, but empty words. There wasn't a drop of sincerity in them, only fear. The fear of losing everything he thought was self-evidently his. By then, Sophie's patience had run out. She stepped forward, pushing Darren aside. "Enough of this charade," she hissed, her face contorted with malice. "Have you completely lost your mind? Gone feral in this backwater? By what right did you block our accounts? Who gave you that right?" She was almost screaming. Her voice, shrill and unpleasant, tortured my ears. "Do you realize what you've done?" she continued, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me. "You're shaming us. We had to cancel the kitchen order. Cancel. Everyone is laughing at us and I'm not allowed to be stressed. The doctor forbade it. I'm carrying your grandchild, and you're driving us into poverty." She threw out her trump card. The pregnancy. Before, that single word would have made me forget myself and rush to fulfill their every demand. But not now. The iceberg in my chest didn't even stir. I slowly raised my eyes to look at her, just a long, intense, unblinking stare, as one might look at a strange, unwelcome object. My gaze stopped her. She faltered, silent, but then immediately composed herself, and her face flushed with renewed anger. Darren interjected, trying once again to play the role of peacemaker. "Mom, seriously, Sophie is right. She can't be stressed. Please, let's settle this amicably. I know you're hurt. We understand. We were wrong. Maybe this house wasn't the best gift, but we'll fix everything. We'll take it all back. Just call your lawyer. Tell him you've changed your mind right now. Here, take my phone." He held out his gleaming smartphone to me, as if it were that simple. One phone call and all their lies, all their betrayals would disappear, wiped away like writing on sand. I placed the knife and the last potato in the bowl, wiped my hands on my old apron, and slowly stood up. Now I was eye level with them. They stood on the ground. I was one step higher on my porch. "You want me to undo everything?" I asked softly. Yes, Mommy." Darren nodded eagerly. Sophie looked at me defiantly, lips pressed tight. "So, I can hand over my pension, my apartment, my entire life to you again?" "Mom, don't exaggerate," Darren grimaced. "The apartment is ours together, and we will always take care of you." "Like you took care of me when I was sick?" I asked, and my voice grew even softer. But in the silence that followed, it sounded like thunder. They froze. I shifted my gaze to Sophie. She instinctively took a small step back. "I remember everything, Tiff," I said, calling her by her preferred name for the first time in years. "I remember you sitting by my bedside. I remember your caring hands. And I remember the papers you gave me saying they were for taxes, for the condo association, just a mere formality." Sophie's face turned as white as paper. Her malice, her anger, her confidence, all drained from her like poor makeup in the rain. Only the raw fear of an animal remained. Darren looked from me to his wife, uncomprehending. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I looked at my son again. There was fear in his eyes, but also confusion. Perhaps he genuinely didn't know all the details. Perhaps she had even deceived him. Or perhaps he simply preferred not to know. It no longer mattered. He was an accomplice. "I'm talking about the mortgage, Darren," I said, emphasizing each word. "The large mortgage you took out with the bank 8 months ago, using my apartment as collateral with my signature, a signature you obtained while I was delirious." Did you think I would never know? Did you think I would quietly die in this shack and the bank would simply take my house to pay for your debts? The blow landed. It was clear in the way Darren staggered as if punched in the gut. He looked at Sophie with horror and a new, bitter realization. She didn't look at him. She looked down at the ground, at her expensive shoes now stained with country mud. All their schemes, all their manipulations crumbled to dust. They stood before me naked in their greed and lies. The mask had been ripped off. The play was over. "So, Darren," I concluded in my quiet, even voice, "do you still want me to call the lawyer?" He couldn't utter a word. He just opened and closed his mouth like a beached fish. Sophie shrank into her shoulders, transforming from a predator into a cornered animal. The silence stretched long and heavy. In that silence, the last drop of my maternal love for him died. It died and was buried right there, beside that rotting porch. "Go," I said. It was not a command or a request. It was a simple statement of fact, like, "It is raining," or "Night has fallen." They silently turned their backs, not looking at each other, like puppets with cut strings, and shuffled towards their expensive, gleaming car. The engine started, not with a roar, but somehow wearily. The car slowly, almost hesitantly, turned around and rolled away down the dusty road. I remained alone on the porch. Beside me was the bowl of peeled potatoes, my lunch, my new life, and the air around me was miraculously fresh. I was watering the tender young peonies, their dark red buds poised to unfurl, when a roar shattered the morning quiet. Not one, but several car engines. A convoy. A chill ran down my spine. They were here. 3 expensive sedans pulled up right in front of my house. Doors opened, and one by one, they emerged. I recognized them. Aunt Mary, a distant relative from Raleigh, North Mariana, and her husband. Darnell, my late husband, Robert nephew, and his wife. A few other relatives, faces I only saw at funerals or weddings, and leading the charge, like 2 generals commanding their troops, were Darren and Sophie. Darren looked even worse than the last time I saw him, gaunt, eyes twitching, but Sophie had utterly transformed. She wore a simple dark dress, no makeup, her hair neatly pinned up. Universal distress seemed etched on her face. She clung to Darren's arm, supporting him as if he might collapse at any moment. A perfect tableau, the distraught son and his loyal, grieving wife. They arranged the relatives in a semicircle, as if preparing for an execution. Darren, prompted by Sophie's whispered cue, began to speak. His voice trembled, but now it wasn't panic. It was a well-rehearsed sorrow. "Dear aunts and uncles, Aunt Mary, Darnell, thank you all for coming," he began, sweeping a tragic gaze over everyone. "We called you here because a tragedy has struck our family. A great tragedy." He paused, letting his words sink into the air. The relatives looked at me with confusion and pity. "Our mother, Anna, she is ill," Darren said with emotion. "After her pneumonia, she began to have mental problems. She forgets everything, mixes things up. She imagines conspiracies, mortgages. She doesn't recognize us. She accuses us of terrible things." I stood there, watering can in hand, listening to this absurd play. I couldn't believe my ears. They had decided to declare me insane to take everything, to make their deception merely a product of my sick imagination. "We wanted to treat her," Sophie chimed in with a soft, mournful voice, like an angel, dabbing the corners of her dry eyes with a tissue. "We found the best doctors, a clinic, but she ran away. She found this abandoned house somewhere, and is hiding here. She refuses help, freezing all the accounts so we can't pay for her treatment. She's a danger to herself. We're afraid she'll do something rash." Aunt Mary, a kind-hearted woman, gasped, "Oh dear," and clutched her hands to her chest. "Evie, my dear, what is this? Come home. To the city. You need to be in a hospital." They looked at me as if I were a dangerous lunatic, a mixture of pity, fear, and a kind of revulsion. I saw condemnation in their eyes. Darren and Sophie's plan was insidious, simple, and effective. Who would believe a lonely old woman living in a dilapidated house against a respectable young son and his pregnant wife who were so worried about her? I remained silent. What could I say? Any word from me, any protest, they would immediately declare a symptom of illness. See, the aggression, the inappropriate reaction. And just as it seemed all was lost, that I had lost this final, dirty battle, I heard the gentle creak of the gate behind me. "May I be curious?" a deep, steady voice asked. "What is this gathering about?" Everyone turned. Uncle Kurt stood on the path. He wore his usual work clothes but stood as straight as a general. His clear blue eyes swept over the entire delegation, paused on Darren and Sophie, and finally rested on me. "And you, excuse me, who are you?" Sophie asked haughtily, looking him up and down. "Me? I'm the neighbor," he replied calmly. "Samuel. And who are these good folks who've brought a whole crowd here to intimidate this woman?" "We're her relatives!" Darren spoke loudly, his voice filled with exasperation. "And we've come to rescue her. She's not well." Uncle Kurt slowly walked over and stood beside me. He didn't look at me, but I felt his solid presence. "Not well, you say?" He narrowed his eyes at Darren. "Strange. I've been talking with Anna for a week now, and I find her to be a perfectly sane, clear-headed, and very strong woman. A woman whom her own son brought out here on her birthday and dumped in this shack like a useless object. I saw it with my own eyes," the relatives murmured. Aunt Mary looked at Darren with suspicion. "And I also see a woman," Uncle Kurt continued, his voice growing firmer, "who is single-handedly turning this shack into a home without any help. She's lit the stove, cleaned up, and she's gardening. Is that how crazy people behave? To me, that's how people behave when everything has been taken from them. But they couldn't take the most important thing, the will to live." He took another step closer to the delegation. "As for these two young people," he shifted his gaze to Sophie, "you two look very strange to me. You arrived in an expensive car, dressed well, but claim your mother has cut off all your funds. How can you come here when you're down to your last penny? And you don't look like grieving children. You look like swindlers who've come to extort the last coins from an old woman. Only, instead of threats, you use tears and lies." He spoke the last words loudly and clearly, and they hit their mark. The relatives, who had arrived with sympathy for Darren, now looked at him and Sophie with suspicious eyes. Their well-staged performance was collapsing before their eyes. Aunt Mary stepped over to me. "Evie, is it true he kicked you out?" I nodded slightly, and that was enough. All their lies burst like soap bubbles. The relatives began to murmur, glancing at Darren and Sophie with anger and judgment. Darnell, Robert nephew, a big man, walked up to Darren. "What the hell are you doing, you bastard?" he growled. "Trying to drive your own mother into her grave?" Darren recoiled. Sophie grabbed his arm and pulled him towards the car. Their public trial had turned into their public humiliation. They fled, running under the scornful gazes of the very people they had brought as their judges. The cars turned around one by one and drove away. Finally, only Uncle Kurt and I remained on the path. I turned to him. "Thank you," I whispered. He just smiled through his gray beard. "Don't mention it, neighbor. Speaking the truth isn't helping. It's a duty." I watched the dust from their cars settle on the road, and I knew this was the end, an absolute end. They hadn't lost in court or at the bank. They had lost here, on this land, before these simple folk. And this defeat was worse than any financial ruin for them. It was moral bankruptcy, complete and absolute. The dust on the road settled, and with it, the dust of my old life settled too. Since that day, when my relatives came to witness my shame but it ultimately turned into my son's own, I never heard from them again. Marcus Jones, my diligent lawyer, pursued the case to the very end. The bank recognized the mortgage agreement as fraudulent, especially after several relatives agreed to testify about Darren and Sophie's strange behavior, and their attempt to have me declared incompetent. All charges against me were dropped. I didn't bother to find out what they faced next. I only knew that they faced criminal charges for fraud and had to deal with the consequences of their actions themselves, without my help, without my money, and without my forgiveness. Their world built on lies had collapsed, burying them in its rubble. And my life had only just begun at 63. The first thing I did once all legal procedures were settled was sell the apartment on Peachtree Street without a hint of regret. I went there one last time to collect my most cherished possessions, the photo album, a few books, and Robert old armchair. Walking through the empty, echoing rooms, I felt no nostalgia. This place was no longer my home. It had become a mere property, cold and alien. My home now lay in this peaceful countryside. The money from the sale, combined with my secret savings fund, I invested in secure, albeit low-yield assets on Marcus's advice. This brought me the most important thing: certainty. Certainty that I would never again have to depend on anyone, that I could afford treatment if needed, firewood for winter, and a new roof over my head. I embarked on building, not entirely by hand, of course. I hired a team of 2 clever and sober men from a nearby town. They replaced my roof, installed new wooden window frames, built a new hearth, a proper old-fashioned stove with a mantelpiece, and erected a sturdy new porch that no longer creaked or swayed. I didn't just oversee them. I worked alongside them, fetching things, painting, cleaning. At first, they looked at me with surprise, then with respect. "Evelyn, you are unusual," the foreman, Ben, told me. "You have a backbone most men don't." I just smiled. I never knew I had a backbone. All my life, I thought I was soft and compliant. It turned out a core had always been within me. It just hadn't had the chance to reveal itself. The house transformed before my eyes. From a dark, gloomy shack, it became a cozy, bright wooden house. I whitewashed the walls myself, hung simple checkered curtains with tiny floral patterns on the windows, placed Robert armchair in the corner of the room, arranged books on shelves, and the house began to breathe. It began to live. When spring came, I started gardening. Uncle Kurt helped me uproot diseased plants and plant a small garden patch. For the first time in my life, I planted potatoes, carrots, and onions with my own hands, nurturing each sprout like a small child. And Mother Earth, sensing the care, responded with unprecedented generosity. The peonies I saw that first day had grown into a huge, lush bush and bloomed so spectacularly it took my breath away. I remembered my grandmother teaching me embroidery when I was a child. I found an embroidery hoop in the old chest, bought threads and fabric in town, and in the evenings, sitting by the warm hearth, I began to embroider simple patterns: flowers, birds, decorative lines. My fingers, it turned out, still remembered. This monotonous work was so calming, it sorted my thoughts. I no longer talked to Robert Photo. I felt he was right here, and he would have been proud of me. Uncle Kurt and I became close friends. We didn't delve into each other's inner lives, but everything was understood without words. In the evenings, he often stopped by for tea with herbs we had gathered together in the forest. We sat on my new porch, drinking tea from old earthenware mugs, and silently watched the sunset. And that silence held more meaning than all the conversations I had had over the past 10 years. Sometimes I think about my son, but it is no longer pain or resentment. It is compassion, as for a stranger who has lost his way. I nourished him. I gave him everything I could, but I could not instill in him what he lacked: a conscience. And that is not my fault. That was his choice. I had let him go, spiritually severing the last thread that still connected me to him. He was no longer my duty, my pain, my responsibility. He was simply a man who once was my son. Now I am 65. I am sitting on my porch. In my hand is a cup of hot tea brewed from the herbs in my garden. The sun is setting behind the trees, painting the sky with magnificent colors. The air smells faintly of freshly cut grass and flowers. Inside, firewood crackles warmly in the hearth. A stray cat I named Leo is curled up on my lap, purring. I look at my hands. They are rough from gardening. My nails are no longer as perfectly manicured as they once were. But these are the hands of a living person, a person building her own life. Sometimes, I think I should be grateful to Darren and Sophie. Without their cruelty, I would likely still be living out my days as a shadow in someone else's life. I would never have known what I was capable of. I would never have met Uncle Kurt, never seen these peonies bloom so vibrantly. I would never have tasted the water from my own well. They wanted to bury me, but instead, they gave me life, a real life. I took a sip of tea. It was tart, aromatic, full of life. I think that dignity is not something others bestow upon you. It is not their respect or recognition. Dignity is something you find within yourself. It is something you reclaim from fear, from resentment, from despair. It is something you take back for yourself when everything seems lost. And that quiet, hard-won victory, that is true happiness and true freedom.